All right, so we did begin Mark 5. So we'll start at verse 21, the very one we heard about in church today. So someone wants to start us there?
I'll start.
All right.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhaging for 12 years. She had endured much under the physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhaging stopped, and she felt in her body that she had been healed of her disease. Immediately aware that the power had come from him, Jesus turned around to the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw the commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside, and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the little girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. As they were overcome with amazement, he strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. I find it amusing. He told them no one should know this, and then here it is in the Bible.
Yeah.
There's that trend, particularly through Mark, of don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. It's like the Streisand syndrome.
And Mark is writing it down eagerly. Don't tell anybody. Got it.
Well, it's like the harder you tell someone to don't tell anyone, the more they want to tell somebody.
Well,
and so they do.
You saw a little girl and a guy get raised from the dead or be healed of terrible illnesses.
Super inconspicuous.
Yeah.
There we go.
Meanwhile, the man who was healed with the demoniac was healed. He was begging to go with Jesus, and Jesus said, "No, just go tell everybody about what what the Lord has done for you."
Yeah, I think that's an interesting contrast. In the last one, he said, "Go tell everybody what he did," and now here he says, "Don't tell anybody."
Mm-hmm.
Is that because here he's with Jews and the other one he wasn't?
It's a good question. Most of the time in Mark, he says, "Don't talk," but so that is a rare example. Although it is sort of like whatever people want to do, he tells them to do something else. So the guy is like, "I want to come with you," and he's like, "No, you need to go and talk." And then with other people, he's like, "Just don't say anything." And I don't know.
I figure in all these, it's never. I figure it's always a mistake to treat this as this is an accurate accounting of events that specifically happened. Instead, it's a story told to convey a message.
Exactly.
So this is symbolically intended to tell us something.
Yeah, everything's very intentional, all the details. Yep.
It was interesting the thing you pointed out in the service about the woman had been hemorrhaging for 12 years, and this little girl happened to be 12 years old.
Yep.
I know numbers often meant something specific, like 7 I know is a very important number. Is 12 an important number?
Yeah, the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples. So there's something about it that points to like the Jewish culture, which is interesting to think about. So what is it about this woman that in Jewish culture she is maybe unworthy, unclean, cast out, and Jesus heals that? And what is about this little girl that is 12 years old? I mean, it's puzzling. I've never heard a very satisfactory answer to this ever. The closest I've had is like what I shared today, which is that they're linked somehow, and I almost feel like the little girl might have seen this hemorrhaging woman and her fate, her life.
Oh.
And how did she feel about that? You know, this is my future, or this is possible for me, you know. Because this is one of the worst fates, is to basically be in a situation where you can't be married, can't have children. Then you're worthless as a woman. So, yeah.
And the hemorrhaging, I've always wondered, but it seems like we know it was menstruation, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't like she was just randomly bleeding. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
from what I've always heard is it's menstrual flow, which would
Constantly
mean
for 12 years, yeah. That's not fun.
no.
When you mentioned this little girl panicking about that it reminds me of a movie I saw way back when in early '90s. I think it was called My Girl or something like that, where a little girl is being raised by her single dad, who is a mortician. She'd been around all this stuff, and I guess she had her first period, and she immediately cried out, "I'm hemorrhaging!" And he being the single dad had to explain to her what's going on, and
It still happens
Oh, yeah.
to this day. There was a story a woman shared. It was like a tweet or something like that. That she goes, "When I was 14 years old, I got my period, and I thought it was going to be just constant blood flow the rest of my life. Like that's what a period was, is you're bleeding all the time." And she goes, and then like a couple days later, there was a dog, and I pet the dog, and then my period stopped. And I thought that maybe I was pregnant and I was going to have a half dog, half...
wow!
She goes, "This tweet brought to you by the Catholic Sexual Education Program," meaning she went to a Catholic school and they didn't teach her anything. So she was terrified. And this happens a lot where people think there's something, we shouldn't talk about it.
Well, even the public
Right?
schools, they can have education that bad.
Yeah.
I mean,
We shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't educate that there's something gross and wrong about it. And then girls don't hear this vital information about how they work. And of course, as we know too, I think it's interesting that the men couldn't cure her. In fact, she grew worse. I'm like, no doubt. I'm sure, you know, there's so little people have known about women's bodies forever. It just were not a huge subject of interest. And it's just now.
Medically, at least they weren't.
Medically.
Yeah.
Medically.
Sexually.
Yeah.
That's very. I mean,
Yeah.
that is staggering, especially in this age. You'd think that. I mean, we're trying to clone animals and such at this point, and yet we still try to avoid that topic for understanding. I mean, this is the basics of how life continues on.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
The taboos.
I mean, at the same
The
time, the
taboos.
taboos are strong.
Yeah.
I'll admit it's an awkward topic for me to talk about.
But that's totally fine. I think it's good for us to acknowledge that it's awkward, but that doesn't mean it's wrong to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To say
Yeah.
it's okay for you to feel uncomfortable, and but yet 50% of the population experiences this, and so it's something that should be studied, understood, talked about, normalized. So I can't help but think that misogyny was some part of this story. And that's why I continue to say how much I love the way Jesus reacts to women. Because if it would be different if we had side by side the exact same stories with a different rabbi. of what would have been culturally normal, I think then we would see how radical Jesus was.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think both of them would have been, if both the woman and the girl would have been completely ignored.
Yeah.
I think the woman was probably very wealthy. And she may have been married since she evidently had enough money to spend on physicians. So I think this is a case of two wealthy people. Jairus is a wealthy man
Leader of a
with a daughter,
synagogue.
and wealthy enough to have the luxury of caring about a daughter.
Huh? Oh, that's really interesting. And then that juxtaposes Jairus with this woman. He's well known and lifted up in the community, and she's an outcast in the community simply because of her ailment. When in a world like today, they might be equal in power and esteem and ability.
Yes, I can see that.
That's interesting. And she's and they're both asking for help. Ooh, I've never put those two together before. That's cool, Kirsten.
Okay.
Should we move on? 6?
You want to take 6?
Sure, I will.
Okay.
He left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their own hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, "Wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. Should I read one more segment?
Sure.
King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, "John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." But others said, "It is Elijah," and others said, "It is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old." But when Herod heard of it, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, has been raised." For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers, and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it." And he solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" She replied, "The head of John the Baptizer." Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
That always disturbs me. It's like a young girl asking for the head of anyone. I mean, I realized different days back then, and but ew.
Yeah.
She was influenced by somebody.
Very much a
Yeah.
cutthroat environment.
On a more
Literally.
philosophical note, one thing stood out to me in the first passage here, talking about how Jesus referred to himself as a prophet, or at least compared himself to the prophets when he said, "Prophets are not with honor except in their own hometown."
Oh. Yeah.
But he wasn't.
That makes sense, actually.
He wasn't highlighting himself greater than that. I mean, that's actually kind of rather humble thing for him to say.
He never refers to himself as the Son of God. He refers to himself as the Son of Man, which is a very different title.
Mm-hmm.
And I recently, so I've always heard this, that Son of Man is linked to a vision in Daniel or Ezekiel, where he has a vision of a son of man coming down from the clouds. So some people have linked it up to that, but I recently heard what to me was a much more satisfying explanation, and it's linked to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where they use son of humanity, or child of humanity, as a term for the one who knows who they are, the one who have I said this already?
No.
Okay. The word is idahaya, and it's child of humanity is the generous term for it. And it's sort of like when you finally realize who you are. You finally realize that you're a human being with God living in you. And the kind of like, you might call it awakened or enlightened or something like that. And then you're like, you're like fully activated. And it means other people can be too, but they're just not. And so that person usually, out of compassion, wants to go to other people and help them. And what's interesting about this is that, we confess Jesus is true God and true man, right?
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't deny that. It's just another way to look at it. It's a way to say, what if that divinity is in all of us? We're just not truly aware of it. Jesus was completely aware of it.
Yeah.
And so therefore, he was there to show other people. And in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, it assumes that Mary had that same awakening as well. And that's what the disciples were supposed to have as well. That was what Christianity was to help people wake up to the fullness of who they were. And that could change the world, because it changes how you see everything when you are awakened. So it's a different way to look at it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and it means in some ways it's not like Jesus is the only one that could ever be that status. In some ways it's like he's saying, look, I've woken up to who I am, but you guys can too.
I can just see some of the right wingers going, "Oh my goodness, Jesus was woke."
Yeah, I know, right?
And yet they're supposed to be the religious right. Oh my, but yeah, I always thought about it as just saying about the whole, being Son of God, the Son of Mary, so Son of God and Son of Man, and He shall reign forever. And
Yeah.
ever. But this whole awakening aspect, that's new to me.
Something I saw a little bit was in both of those, somewhere kind of mentioned how you when they said that he would not be recognized up first, like in his own hometown and stuff like that. Both those things say how people that aren't open to don't get the full advantage of getting the whole advantage.
Yeah.
And so both of them said the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that middle section always resonates with me, where if the people you're trying to talk to are receptive, just wipe the dust from your shoes and move on. Like, that not everyone is ready to hear, and that's okay. It's not our job to force them. We can offer, and then we can move on. that's okay.
And that might be why he wasn't accepted in his own hometown.
Mhm.
They already had formed an opinion of who he was.
Mhm.
Because they knew him as a little snot-nosed toddler.
Right.
Like, how could he have anything to say?
Right.
Which is fundamentally this whole thing is that we, and I fall prey to this too, we tend to believe that prophets or these gurus are somehow different. And yet every single one of them will say, I'm just like you. Buddha, the Dalai Lama, like all of these people they've all said, I'm just like you. I've just seen something that has changed everything within me. And I want that for you because it changed everything for me. And it's interesting because Jesus never actually says, I'm different than you all. He never says that.
No.
And so that's so interesting to me that we insist that he's so different, and but by putting someone on a pedestal, or by putting prophet on a pedestal, you're missing the humanity
That's true.
and the possibilities. So Jesus was just a human, so he couldn't have been a prophet because prophets are different and special. But for people who'd never met him, oh, he's a prophet, therefore he can't be human.
Mm-hmm.
And we do the same thing. We're like, you know, if we went back in time and we saw Jesus ever, you know, having a bad day, or, you know, we'd be like, well, that can't be Jesus because Jesus was perfect. You know, Jesus was. I mean,
Oh yeah.
do you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
I mean-
and then we separate ourselves too. We're like,
No
well,
crime he made.
we're bad and sinful and everything, but Jesus was perfect and everything. And has that helped?
We're conveniently giving ourselves an out by doing that.
That's kind of what I feel. And it's not about shame and guilt. I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is, like, are we missing something Jesus was trying to show us? So by the hometown, they're like, well, you can't possibly be special because we saw you, like, throw rocks when you were 5 years old at an ox, and that was bad, and you got in trouble and you cried, and we all thought it was funny. But are we doing the same thing?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we do the same thing even with our modern day. I hate to use the term idols in this context, but modern day celebrities and such. How
Yes.
dare? We make a big deal when they go through divorces or when they have bad days. When a politician fails to anticipate the economy tanking, or we hold celebrities up to higher standards than we hold ourselves up to.
Yeah.
Well, and it's kind of.
Come personally on social media and suddenly their character gets written out of a TV series. It's like, I mean, sometimes maybe I could see it, but it's like, what? That seems like kind of an extreme overreaction.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the original sin thing again that you were talking about today, where I do have that in me, like that I am supposed to not be worthy of Jesus, but yet I can receive him. Like that, I feel like that was drilled into me as a
It was.
child.
It
Cleanse
was.
us from all
That was it,
unrighteousness.
yeah.
Yeah,
We
like,
need it because
like we're
we're
not
full of
actually
it.
worthy, but, you know, we're saved through grace. Kind of going back to that I said once a couple weeks ago where, like, I was told, you know, if you commit suicide, you're going to go to hell because you can't ask for forgiveness. It's the whole same thing where we're unworthy. The only way we're going to get saved is by accepting Jesus' grace and acknowledging that we're unworthy. That's just, like, in me.
Yeah. It's become
It's been jammed in you.
Yeah, it's become the
I believe-
dominant story, but I have to say with full clarity, that has never been the only story.
Yeah.
There have always been Christians who have argued against that and found it unhelpful. Always. Celtic Christianity is an entire form of Christianity that was never bought into the main thread of the Augustinian, you know, Western belief system. And there's others as well. And the thing is, too, every mystic I've ever read affirms sort of like the belovedness and the love that like when God approaches, that God just comes as like, oh, it's you. And, you know, God never approaches a human being as, ew, okay, you too, you know. So, and also, my big thing is, regardless of what people say and who says it, does it work? Does it heal? Does it help? Does it save? What are the fruits of the belief?
Mm-hmm.
And I look at
Yep.
the fruits of this belief, and in fact, they're studying it now with religious trauma. And everyone who is experiencing religious trauma so far that they've studied, it's gone back to this unworthiness that's been pounded in their head, and control and power, and all your thoughts are bad and your feelings are bad and you're this horrible thing. So far, no one has experienced religious trauma from feeling that they're loved and the grace of God and worthiness.
Mm-hmm.
Put an asterisk next to that as we continue to learn more, but my suspicion is that belief has been taught and we've bought into it because somehow it makes us feel like that's the right answer.
Why? That's really weird. And I think it's backfiring now.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that was used for power with the church
Yeah.
so much. And now, why is it backfiring? I don't know why at this time in time is it that it's backfiring. And maybe things have to backfire. Maybe we're in this wonderful deal where something's going to change and people are going to say, oh, that's really good, and come more voluntarily than forced and feared into.
Like waking
Maybe.
up.
Maybe. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. I grabbed that out of your sermon about that part of us being kind of forced into a lot of this stuff with fear and stuff with like
Yeah.
that.
And if you're told this is what you have to believe in order to be loved and accepted, then the not believing it is a terrifying thought. But
Sacrilegious.
It's sacrilegious, but
Terrible.
I'm just
Worst
more
thing
and
could
more.
happen.
Yeah,
Hell.
yeah. I'm just more and more not buying that.
Mhm.
I think that like woven in to the Christian history has been a lot of ego and power and control, and I'm trying to dismantle and see, well, what was the core? And you see the way, and even these stories are not like a perfect rendering and recording, but if you can see through it, what's the energy and the feeling? Do you feel more freed from these stories, or do you feel more bound? And I think that's the whole thing. Why would I believe anything that keeps me bound, and who's benefiting from that? God's not benefiting. Like, imagine 8 billion people on the planet who love themselves and are filled with harmony and peace and joy and see value in other people, versus 8 billion people who have given up, feel hopeless, are easily swayed by fear and taken advantage of, right?
Okay, can you really love other people if you hate yourself?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And that's the lie that we've been told, and even Paul, as we're reading through the letters, I have some issues with some of the letters. But Paul says in Philippians, love others more than yourself. You know, be selfless, give others. And the best I can come up with is that was his perspective. And almost all of this has been written by men, right? If you're a powerful, educated person
That's
who
true.
realizes that you've done wrong, you're going to have that perspective of, it feels good to just be kind of totally humble and to be like, oh God, yes, I messed up and I'm so bad. Thank you for loving me anyway. But when that's turned around on marginalized people who didn't have power and didn't have standing, I think that that's the wrong medicine for them.
And I think he might be saying
think so.
because there was so many classes and stuff
Yeah.
like that, where he was maybe this saying, okay, so love people the same as yourself too, in a way. And,
Or even, to your point, if the people reading it are the educated ones, and there's slaves and other things in the congregation, that would have been like a aha moment of like, wait, I'm supposed to love them more
yeah.
and serve them? they're supposed to serve me.
Right.
So that might have felt
So I
pretty
think it's
radical.
more of an equaling than,
Yeah.
than it is.
Maybe, yeah.
I
You
don't know.
needed shocking language in order to get people's attention.
Yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
used.
I do have to take issue with the thought that if one does not love themselves, they cannot love others. I mean, I do think of people who are basically thinking that they're the scum of the earth, but they're going to, but they love it, but they might think that everyone else is so much better than themselves that I mean that they can truly love others without thinking that they're scum. But and I pity. I feel very sorry for such individuals. But I can't say that they can't love others if they don't love themselves.
That makes
yes,
sense to me.
But I really
Might not be
feel
a
sorry
healthy
about
love,
such
though.
individuals.
That's what I was going to say is that if you find no compassion for other people, or if you only love other people and not yourself, then it's love, but it's not the fullest, highest form of love, which, I find I have more compassion for other people that might have irritated me before when I do the work inside and see that it's really about me. And I learn to love those parts of myself that are like them, or, then all of a sudden, so it truly is, as I love more and more parts and I integrate more and more parts within myself into harmony, I have way more compassion and patience for the people in the world. So there's something there. But you're right. I mean, there can be imbalances.
Love with imbalances.
With imbalances, imperfect love.
Mhm.
And that's what
Or-
we're all trying to figure out.
And what's the perfect love? Who's got the perfect love? I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty high standard.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a work in progress. Right?
Yeah, it is a work in progress.
One thing I find interesting about the John the Baptist part is Herod liked John the Baptist. He wanted him around. And it reminds me a little bit of Pilate, I think, liked Jesus. He wanted him around. But neither of these two men were willing or able to stand up to the people. Their power meant more to them, I guess, than what they knew maybe to be right. So I just
I like that.
That's a
interesting.
great point.
That's a good observation,
Yeah, you're right. The saving face and their power and keeping their position was more important
Than
than.
the life of the.
Yeah, they both knew it was not the right thing to do. Like,
Saving face, that's funny.
I think that's really a powerful story in and of itself, is to take all the powerful people and their interactions with Jesus or John the Baptist, and the ones that had the courage to change or step out. And it's interesting. Like, poor people following Jesus didn't have much to lose, right? They
Right.
only had a gain.
Right.
But Herod would have lost. Which is maybe, when we get to save your life to lose your life and those sort of passages, maybe that's kind of what Jesus is talking about is, where's our integrity and what are we gaining and losing with our decisions?
But as you said before, I believe, you can see that Jesus is really coming out now. And I think you mentioned it. Whatever. I mean, he's doing stuff that the world's people are gonna hear about in
Yeah.
the area.
Yeah.
He's showing them kind of that there's a huge separation between how he thinks and how the rest of the world thinks.
Let's finish 6 because that keeps happening.
you want to read, Kirsten?
Okay. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat. But he answered them, You give them something to eat. They said to him, Are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give to them to eat? And he said to them, How many loaves have you? Go and see. When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. They ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate and all were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men.
We don't care about the women and the children.
Yeah.
So it was more like 20,000.
Yeah, it's got to be a huge number of people.
As long as the men are full.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, either they left them at home or they just didn't bother counting them.
I'm impressed they managed to count 5,000 men. And separate out the men from all the rest of the heads.
Yeah.
Got to be an estimate.
But
Yeah.
but do
Or
you
is it
think
5,000 souls? I don't know.
Yeah.
do you
That's
think
still a
that
big
it was
number.
basically men? I would think.
Or
Doesn't
what?
one of the other gospels say plus women and children?
One of the other
Yeah.
gospels does
Yeah.
say, yeah.
I know, but
I'm sure it's one of those historical numbers too. It's not really a real count. It's just there were a lot of people.
Yeah.
I lost count at 57.
and
There's a
then
lot of people.
I don't know if that was for they were following and that was part of their deal, and they probably didn't think the women needed to come to that. Maybe too.
Maybe.
I-
Maybe. Could have been the women were home
Yeah, absolutely.
with the kids or something.
Well, I'm sure there were a lot of housekeeping tasks that just needed to keep doing. Like if they had any kind of livestock, those would need tending.
Sure.
If there was any spinning to be done, that's how to do it. Happen all the time. If there's any cleaning, cooking, that's a constant job.
So with this, I used to sort of, when I was younger, not believe that many of these miracles could be true because that they were more symbolic or exaggerated because I hadn't seen anything like that. I mean, to me, it's always strange that we have beliefs. Well, in the Bible times, God spoke down from a cloud or whatever, and now as I'm older, I'm like, these stories came from somewhere. So what can I put them to in life that's like that? And there's actually interesting stories. I mean, there are people in this world still today who are said to be able to lay hands and heal people. That was really interesting for me to learn. The father of Reiki, which is the energy thing, came down from the mountain, and this was just 120 years ago. And all of a sudden he could heal people. He healed thousands of people after an earthquake in Japan. That's really fascinating to me. And there's records of that. And then they were talking about the breaking of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and it's almost as if some people get an insight into the workings of the universe. Like all of this could be explained by physics. All of this.
Mm-hmm.
That Jesus could heal people, maybe he had powerful Reiki energy or whatever, like he was just this great conduit. And maybe there is an answer in physics for being able to take matter and duplicate it. I don't know, but to me now I hold a little bit more that there is much more to reality than what we've been taught.
Yes.
And maybe part of this was that Jesus wanted to feed people and he said, I want your needs taken care of. Maybe part of it was Jesus was saying, look, it's not about me and like, look what I can do. It's look what can be done. Maybe the universe and the world is far richer than what our human minds can understand. And maybe there are some people every once in a while who can access something, some sort of energy or something where they can do far more, like levitating and, far more than what we've been taught to believe. That our minds are just very narrow of what can be. And that's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I always took this miracle as being one of the more plausible ones.
Okay.
Because Jesus, Jesus knows the people of this area. They know that he knows what time it is. He knows that a lot of these people who are here to see him, they probably, I think that they probably had food in their cloaks, or some of them would
I
have
see.
supplies, because they know where they're at, and many of them came from a fair distance. But by demonstrating that we only have 5 fishes and 5 loaves and a couple of fish, but we are going to offer these up to you, and these are people who are open to hearing his teachings and who have been listening to his teachings, and now he's offering what he has. This is getting a little bit low. Here are a few. I'll take what if I need anything. I don't need what I've got, so I'll keep what
That's
I need
interesting.
for my family, but I'm going to put what I don't need into the basket and pass it along. And thus we have 12 baskets. Where did these extra baskets come from? As well as the fish. Just because, these people heard Jesus' teachings, and they were willing to share what supplies they brought along. And it spread beyond what was needed for the overall masses, I think. It's still
Yeah.
a miracle in opening their hearts.
Yeah,
That's a
Yeah.
really
It can be a
interesting
real
deal.
miracle getting people
Yeah.
to share.
Yeah, and some of these calls me from families of, you look thin, here, have some more food. I mean,
Yeah, I've definitely heard that interpretation. There's so many different interpretations as people think, how did this happen? But of course, what does it mean too is important too, because even if we don't know how it happened.
it makes me think of that story of heaven and hell, where heaven is where hell is where all these guys are bound together, and they're each trying to feed themselves with spoons that are too long and failing to do so. Or heaven is where everyone is feeding the guy across from him or her,
Yes.
and they're well fed and they're having a grand old time chatting and moving on.
Interesting. I think one thing I think about is if we've ever felt that we saw a miracle in our life somewhere, if we ever felt one, we ever felt that it was a miracle. If we think God can do the slightest miracle, God can do the slightest miracle, it opens the whole can of worms. If he can do one, he can do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no
Yeah.
difference. It just opens the gates. And so I believe that if he wanted to, that it could be your way that absolutely open the heart or whatever. It could be any way. But it is not putting restraints on Jesus and God. But anyways.
Yeah.
That's actually a really, really good point, John, because I think you're right. I've heard that there's a book called, I forget what it is. Okay. But it says that a little thing and a big thing isn't any different in the spiritual realm. It's our perception of it. And it reminds me, if you've seen Star Wars, where Luke goes to Dagobah or whatever, and he's lifting little pebbles, right, with the Force. But then his ship sinks into the swamp, and he can't do it. Because in his mind, he's like, well, that's a big thing, so it takes more energy. And then Yoda just does it like it's nothing. And basically, my understanding of the lesson is it actually doesn't take any more. You either can do it or you can't. It's your mind that tells you that you can't do that. And so I actually think that there's something to that Jesus can heal your cut. Well, okay, then maybe Jesus can also raise you from the dead, or maybe Jesus can multiply food, because the world is so much more complicated and filled with possibility than what our minds believe it to be.
Yes, it is.
Plus, I'm not sacrilegious.
Yeah.
I'm a lot more comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Well,
Which we suffer.
should we finish there? We're about 10 to noon. Or do we want to read to the end and call it a day?
Yeah, we're almost there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you want to finish it?
Yeah,
or-
you go for it.
Okay. So, Jesus walks on the water. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida, where he dismissed the crowd. After saying farewell to them, he went up to the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. When he saw they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came towards them early in the morning, walking on the sea. He intended to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid."
What?
Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about the whole region and began to bring the sick on mats from wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed.
So there again with the physics.
Yeah.
Jesus is like, well, you know, if you can heal someone, you can also make more bread, and you can also walk on water. Why not?
Is this the same story where we, in other Gospels, we hear also about Peter, I think it was, who tried
Yeah.
to walk out to him and started to sink? Where in this one he was going to pass him by, but
Yeah.
don't worry, just me. I'll get in the boat fine with you, and then the wind cease. Are they maybe
Well-
combining the two stories of him sleeping?
Well, we did that already, yeah. So there's two in a row. One was he was in the boat asleep, and he calms the sea and the storm. And in this one, he's walking on the water, and they think he's maybe a ghost. And then so it happens twice. It's really interesting. But I think I can't remember which gospel it is. I think it's Matthew, where at this point when Jesus is walking in the water, Peter says, "Can I come out too?" And he says, "Yes." So,
If you guys look at 52, okay, here we're talking about Jesus walking on water, and it ends up saying, "For they did not understand about the loaves."
Yeah, but their hearts were hardened. It's like I can hear, but versus the
That's
won't
kind
get
of
too much
amazing
this.
that they would go,
They're still
just
stuck
started
on
go
that.
from that to that, I think.
yeah, I wonder if they didn't understand about the loaves. They didn't understand what happened. So they didn't think that Jesus could do this, and they were confused. Maybe that he hadn't expanded their mind to what was possible yet, and they were just confused. Like, what are we seeing? What's
So repeating
happening?
that whole thing about being open to something or not.
Yeah. If
they
you-
weren't getting it.
Yeah, they were going, if they don't understand the loaves, how are they going to understand the walking on the water, or something? But I think that's amazing that would come right back into the next story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which also shows that
That-
you can be there witnessing it
Or,
and not believe it.
or the author is.
Mark really drives home a lot of that. They ain't get
Yeah.
it. They don't get it.
They don't get it. They don't get it.
Never get it.
And again, this wasn't the same disciple Mark, was it?
It's not the same Mark. It's just
Yeah,
the
it's
No.
like, in other words, we didn't get it. We didn't get it. We were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.